back to In the Middle. I'm Derek Neuner, your host, and before we get to an excellent guest that I'm really excited about, I want to plug that we are now on Spotify and on iTunes. You can search us either way so that you can digest our podcast either in the video form, as we've traditionally done, or now on the audio form. I believe we're working on getting onto YouTube too. That way you can take us with you on any of your devices. We're really excited about that, and we're excited about the future, some of the stuff we've got planned. Sitting across from me is somebody who has had a huge impact on St. Louis City. Jennifer Joyce was the longest-serving circuit attorney in the history of the city. She is a DeBerg High graduate. I mentioned that because I live down the street now from DeBerg, down in Princeton Heights. Went to St. Louis University, as did I, so we were both Billikens there, and then went on to SLU Law and joined city politics, if you want to call it that, joined the legal team for the city as assistant circuit attorney in 1994 and served in that role for 6 years. Decided to take a leap herself and run for circuit attorney, which she was victorious in doing in 2000, and she served in that position for 17 years. That's really unheard of to serve that long, and certainly now you see some bigger cities, long-term circuit attorneys are being shoved out of office by individuals who are running on a more progressive platform, a reform platform, and we'll get to that. You can follow Jennifer on Twitter at JenniferJoyceCA, and I'll give her a chance at the end to plug what she's doing too now. Thank you so much for joining me and for being with us tonight. So we talked a little bit before we got started. You did a little bit of private law work, but then really quickly out of college at a young age decided to jump into public service. What was your motivation behind that?
Well, I worked really hard in law school and I got good grades, and so as a result I was able to get a very competitive job at one of the large law firms. They were paying the highest out of any law jobs for people right out of law school, and I got that job, and that was back in the day when LA Law was on, and that was my vision of what I wanted my legal career to be. I wanted to be driving a BMW and making what seemed to me at the time a lot of money.
Yeah.
I think it was $60,000 a year was what I was making, but this was a long, long time ago. It was the top legal salary for first-year associates. So I was really excited about that job, working at a law firm which is now part of Hush Blackwell. And it was super high quality silk stocking law firm. I learned a lot. I can't imagine a better job right out of law school, but the only problem was I started to get very, very bored.
Yeah.
Because what I was doing was helping people fight over money.
Oh.
And I remember the last straw was we were involved in some massive federal litigation. I was in the litigation department, which meant that I wrote briefs for other people to sign.
Mm-hmm.
And I got other lawyers ready for meeting with clients, but I never met any clients.
Sure.
And when I did, something horrible came up at the last minute and they needed me to cover a motion docket or something, I would literally walk to court talking to myself, rehearsing what I was going to say in front of the judge. And this was before Bluetooth. I mean, I looked like a straight up self-talker, walking down the street, gesticulating and stuff.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I never got to go to court, never got to do anything, and I was really bored. And we were fighting about the Denver airport runway. And I had to become an expert on all the different types of cement admixtures because the runway had failed, and we represented a cement company, and the issue was, did they use the right admixture? And I was so bored with that topic that it made me take a look at myself. Meantime, my good friend from law school is at the circuit attorney's office, and I would call her to see if she wanted to go to lunch or whatever, and you know how somebody, when you're talking to them on the phone and they put their hand over the phone because they got to talk to somebody else but you can still hear?
Yeah.
Well, she would do that to me. She'd hold on a second, and she'd put her hand over the phone, and she'd go, I also need the knife and the bloody clothes. And she'd come back, yeah, admixtures, yeah. And, I mean, it was just clear to me her job was so much more interesting than my job. And I was fortunate enough not to have any student loan debt. So I was in a position where I could take a huge pay cut And I was basically spending all my money trying to cheer myself up anyway at
Yeah.
that point because I hated my job. And if you've ever had a job you hate, your life sucks when you hate your job. So I jumped over to the circuit attorney's office where she was. Thank God Joyce Hayes hired me. Bob McCullough would not hire me. He felt that he was highly suspicious of the pay cut that I was going to take, so they were not interested. Hard pass on Jennifer Joyce.
Yeah.
But Joyce Hayes interviewed me and got the job, and I just fell in love with it.
Yeah.
Start right off the bat, in love. Within a week, I was just completely on cloud nine. And I think what it was is both of my parents were city aldermen, so I come from a public service kind of background and a city hall kind of background, and
They must have represented St. Louis Hills area.
Lindenwood.
Lindenwood.
We lived in Lindenwood. They were
Okay.
23rd Ward,
Okay.
which is where Joe Vaccaro is now.
Yeah.
But yeah, my dad had the office until he died in 1972, and then my mom succeeded him. There was a brief interloper there for a few months, but then my mom got the office, and she died in 1985. So my childhood was spent handing out literature at the polls and going door to door and giving people brochures and stuff.
Yeah.
So that was kind of my family business, if there was one, was
Right.
politics. So when I decided that I loved this work, and I couldn't believe they were paying me to do this job. It was so meaningful to me, helping people fight who couldn't fight for themselves, and pursuing justice, fighting for justice instead of helping people fight over money.
Right.
You got real human beings who have been harmed and whose lives are changed versus cement admixtures.
Right.
I've never been really a money motivated person, and so the high salary wasn't enough to keep me there.
Yeah.
So
Well, and
decided to run.
you talked on the about the kind of Hollywood dramatization of what a circuit attorney or a comparable district attorney, right, would do. I mean, I think of Harvey Dent, obviously, is probably the most famous one I can come up with. But tell me a little bit about what the circuit attorney does. I mean, I understand that you prosecute homicides and crimes like that, but there's more than just that criminal activity, yeah?
Yeah, well, I think there's a lot of misunderstanding in the public as to what prosecutors do in general. Prosecutors are being really vilified right now in ways that I think are inaccurate and unfair and pretty irresponsible. But circuit attorney is a prosecutor, and the city of St. Louis, as you probably know, is a city without a county.
Right.
So all the other elected prosecutors in the state of Missouri are called county prosecutors. Wesley Bell is a county prosecutor, but St. Louis does not have a city, a county rather.
Right.
So we can't be county prosecutor. St. Louis is organized in judicial circuits, and the city of St. Louis is the 21st Judicial Circuit. So, or 22nd.
22nd. I think
I can't
yeah.
even remember that now.
Yeah.
That's really scary.
It might have changed. I mean,
No,
it's
the 22nd.
yeah. No, it's the
Judicial Circuit.
22nd.
I've
Yeah.
been out for 3 years now, so.
Yeah.
Anyway, so that's why we're called the circuit attorney, but
And
it's
so
basically a county prosecutor.
And so you are representing the city in terms of city violations, right?
No, not city violations. That's the city councilor.
City
handles
councilor,
that.
okay.
Julian Bush now is
Sure.
the city
So
councilor.
your
Misdemeanors through felonies.
misdemeanors, and these would be state crimes then that
State
you're
crimes.
prosecuting
Right.
in the city.
Every case that I brought, the hundreds of thousands of cases while I was circuit attorney, all said state of Missouri versus.
I got you.
We're paid by the city, but we represent the people of the state of Missouri.
So are you then equivalent to a public defender, but you're elected, or no, they're not really the same?
Public defenders are the other side of the adversarial system
I
in
got you.
criminal cases.
Okay.
The prosecutors represent the people.
All right.
Or in federal court they call it the government.
Sure.
And if you commit a crime, it would be my job to review that. When police arrested you, and they would bring that case to me,
Sure.
and I would look very carefully at everything. And if I felt that there was evidence that I could put into court that a crime had been committed, evidence that would prove it beyond a reasonable doubt, then I had the ability to charge you with that crime.
Sure.
And if you were indigent, you would get a public defender assigned
To come help you.
to
Because constitutionally you have to have
right.
a defender.
Right,
Yeah.
and if you were not indigent, then it's up
Up
to
to
you
me.
to hire Scott Rosenblum or whoever.
Sure. So you said that prosecutors are being portrayed unfairly.
Yes.
By whom?
It seems to be kind of the flavor of the month.
Yeah.
I mean, and not even the month. It started as kind of a trickle, and now, you know, I pay attention to all this stuff on social media.
Sure.
The ACLU has, which is an organization that I used to have a lot of respect for when they were,
Yeah.
you know, dealing with free speech and things like that. But with respect to prosecutors, I think that they're being overly broad in their characterization. And they've been targeting sitting district attorneys around the country.
Sure.
Which is fine, and I'm a big believer in those jobs turning over. That's why I left.
Yeah.
But they're being portrayed as, you know, I've seen like videos. Recently there was some clients of mine in Oregon had a challenge by an ACLU-backed candidate, and they did a video, they produced a video that showed a cartoon of the prosecutor throwing out evidence of innocence,
Sure.
and closing the blinds, and
Right.
making sure nobody.
That's
sees
generally
them.
what they portrayed Bob McAuliffe as, in a way,
Mm-hmm.
because they backed Wesley and prosecutor Bell in his
Mm-hmm.
campaign was essentially the old guard. I got a sense that he was getting hit as being too friendly to police. Essentially,
Yeah.
that it was where they came at with him. But I think on your comment, I think prosecutors have a really tough job because you're elected, you're not appointed.
Right.
So you have to stand the ballot, which is good. There's an accountability there. You can
Yes.
remove that person. But they're getting hit from the left and the right. The left from being too hard on criminals, and the right for not being hard enough.
Well, and then there's the Koch brothers section too, and they think that we shouldn't spend so much money on prisons.
Sure.
So when you've got the ACLU and the Koch brothers both teaming up against
Right.
prosecutors, you know, that's pretty
Yeah,
formidable.
that's all on my list. See, she's good. She knows where we're going. So let me ask you, a quick question on that. Then, so what the political pressure? You had to have stood for election 4 times, 5 times. My math is.
4 times.
I'm not a math major. There's a reason why. But that's a long time. That's a lot of elections to stand for. So talk about the
Yes, it
political pressure. When I was doing research on you, you talked about getting pressure from Mayor Slay. I assume Mayor Cruson probably as well.
Mayor Cruson wasn't the mayor.
Was not the
when I
mayor.
was
No. Oh yeah. So you.
there.
Yeah. So you.
Was she?
No, because you would have left in January of 17. Yeah. Right.
Yeah, the
So
mayor-
she was
Mayor
coming
Slay
in. Yeah.
was-
Mayor Slay.
was still there.
And certainly you probably felt pressure from Jeff Rorta and the police union and from Congressman Clay and probably governors. So talk about walking that political line when you look at a case, having to bring it into trial.
Well, I mean, it's really easy, actually. It's really simple. You just do what you think is right. I always felt that the minute you bowed in any way, shape, or form, or let any kind of pressure sway you or impact what decision you made, that was the beginning of the end. I mean, you cannot do your job well as a prosecutor if you allow anything to influence you. And sometimes that's easy, like having Jeff Rorta screaming and yelling.
Sure.
That's really easy to ignore. But sometimes it's tougher, you know.
Sure.
Sometimes it really does look to the outside world like the case is a good case and it should be prosecuted. And I'm ethically obligated not to talk about it publicly, but I can see serious issues with it.
Sure. Right.
And you know, there's a lot of things that a lot of times people want you to do something. Mayor Slay was a great one for sending over an emissary to ask me to do this or not do this, and I think they eventually stopped doing it
Yeah.
because I lost my temper with them a couple of times. But yeah, there's a lot of that. The thing to do, though, is to just not ever make a decision based on anything except the pursuit of justice within the bounds of your responsibility as a prosecutor. And that is a crime, has a crime been committed, and is there evidence to prove it? And is it a crime that we want to prosecute?
Right.
You know, for a lot of the time when I was circuit attorney, sodomy was a crime.
Right, right.
You know, did I prosecute sodomy cases? No,
No.
I did not. A lot of people would make a argument that some types of abortion are a crime. Did I prosecute that? No, I did not. And so that was the exercise of my prosecutorial discretion. But yeah, I mean, I wrote Kim Gardner a little letter and left it on my desk, or her desk, I guess.
Yeah, her desk now, yeah.
If it was my desk, then it was her desk. But that was the number one thing. I had 3 pieces of advice for her, and the number one piece of advice was don't ever, ever make any decisions based on any other reason other than your duty as a prosecutor. Because it will never end.
To thine own self be true, huh?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, set that weather vane to true north for you,
Right.
and don't stray.
And I always felt that if I get voted out of office or something because I was doing what I thought was right, that I could really live with that. But I don't think I could live with thinking that I was bending my decisions one way or another to please whoever was putting pressure on me or
Sure.
whatever constituency was reaching out.
So as you wound down your public service career, you really started to change the conversation in which crimes were prosecuted and what you're sentencing, what you were looking for to get back out of that. And I think nationally we've really moved the conversation, especially on small drug charges, marijuana being a key one that I think you kind of led forward on that to say, I hate to call them petty crimes, but yeah, it's a violation, it's a crime, but it's not really a major concern to our office. I'm sure that's not the right way to phrase it. That's probably not the way you were looking at it, but the way I look at it is low-hanging fruit. You know,
Right.
it's not something that we think people need to be spending time in jail for any
Right.
longer. Talk about what where your mindset was and what that conversation is like amongst prosecutors, because I know that's a tough conversation for you guys. It may be easier for the public to just be like, whatever, let that go. But that's not an easy conversation for the people who have to
Right.
uphold the law.
Well, I have clients all over the country on all different ends of the spectrum on these issues as to whether to start to move in that direction where we're not charging marijuana, we're not charging some of these lower level crimes, or rather to be real, old guard and tough on crime about every possible kind of crime.
Right.
And I think that the field of prosecution in general underwent a huge sea change during the time that I was in it.
Yeah.
We started out in 1994, and was my job to be a drug prosecutor under Joyce Hayes. And back then, you're probably too young to remember it, but how old were you in 94?
5.
5, yeah.
Five, yeah.
So you weren't thinking about the crack epidemic.
No,
then,
I wasn't,
but,
no. But I also grew up my hometown's a small farm town. The only reason that there's any diversity is because our school district pulls in Scott Air Force Base. Otherwise, it would be 99% white. So the way that certainly my parents and grandparents still even think about that era is different than people that lived in downtown.
Right. So in the city of St. Louis and in the state of Missouri, and I think the country, writ large, in the 90s, we were we were under a terrible, terrible crack epidemic. It hit the streets like crazy, and it resulted in bodies piling up like crazy everywhere. 1994, I'm not sure what the stats were, but it was by far and away the highest amount of homicides in the city of St. Louis. In our office, we had a huge homicide unit with all these different prosecutors and investigators in it, and we were still getting underwater because of the amount of homicides. Nothing close to that now. It was really, really high watermark for homicides. And so all over, in the United States Congress, Biden is getting grief for it
Sure.
now. But
And Bill Clinton and Hillary got pilloried for that.
Everybody was tough on crime back then because this crack epidemic was scaring the bejeebers out of everybody. And so it was my job as a brand new prosecutor. My marching orders were to go into court, and if someone was a repeat offender, like if they had a couple of rocks of crack, but they had been busted and charged before with that, you could get a prison sentence for that without possibility of probation or parole for up to 30 years.
For just straight possession,
Right.
not being armed or just...
As a prior and persistent offender.
Huh.
So I remember going into court and arguing that someone with a couple rocks of crack should go to prison for 30 years without probation and parole. And that, I have to say, that at the time did not seem abnormal to me because of, well, number one, my boss was telling me that was
Sure,
my job,
right,
and
yeah,
I liked
right.
to buy groceries, so
Right.
that's what we were all doing. That's what the law in Missouri was. That's what the public wanted. And now when I say that, it sounds insane.
Sure.
Totally insane. So that kind of illustrates the difference in thinking.
But in a way, because that was going to be one of the last things, but we're here, so let's talk about it. It's still on the books, though. You know what so you can, I guess the Board of Aldermen changed what the city is doing about marijuana, and that's really the only thing. I can't talk about
still
crack,
in
but let's, today, I know the sentencing guidelines from the federal level get changed depending on who's in the administration. That's a whole different conversation, but if you were circuit attorney today and you were still prosecuting low-level possession of marijuana, you're still in the legal right to do so because it's still on the books.
Yes.
So there must be a tension between I think maybe an analogy is gay marriage where the public moves forward a lot faster than the legal system can catch up with it.
Well, just because it's on the books, there's nothing that makes a prosecutor have to prosecute anything. No one can force a prosecutor to prosecute something, and no one can stop a prosecutor from prosecuting someone if they're legally within their rights to do so. So that's the topic that we talk about called prosecutorial discretion.
Sure.
And that is why it's really important who you elect as a prosecutor, because they have to have, good character and be high integrity and have good judgment. Hopefully their sense of what types of crimes deserve focus and tough response from the prosecutor reflects that of the community. Prosecutors are elected from their community for a reason, because they're supposed to reflect the norms of that community in the exercise of their prosecutorial discretion. So my client out in Arizona, very red state, very harsh, very tough on crime, they're going to have a different viewpoint than someone in Brooklyn.
Sure.
And vice versa. I told the story about the crack just to show you how attitudes in general have changed,
right.
Not just toward crack, but to all kinds of drugs and all kinds of lower level offenses. And it's become, we're much more focused on the defendant as a person, not just a statistic, not just a bad guy or whatever people would call him. And we think about what is the best intervention in this person's life? What can we do as the criminal justice system that will improve this situation for society? And
you were really also kind of on the foreground of reducing jail sentences and keeping people out of jail and sending them to rehabilitative services, which I'm from a health background.
Yeah.
I really do get a sense of what has led this person to, particularly in 2019, substance abuse for people who don't fit the profile. Right. And I don't mean that to be stereotypical or racist, but there are individuals who have been found dead of fentanyl that you just would, how did they get that? What led them to that? And what leads people to crime? Is it an underlying mental problem? And so I commend you on that, because I think that's a conversation that's really important, is to say as a society, and obviously you just said the prosecutor should reflect that. When I grew up as a kid, don't do the crime if you can't do the time, right? Mm-hmm. But what does that time mean? Is it access to therapy and to something that's going to keep you from returning in 18 months? That's important. You
and I had different childhoods than a lot of people. I would imagine.
Yeah.
I always I'm so grateful for my mom, because I wanted to quit high school when I was 16. In Missouri, you have to go to school till you're 16. And I had a friend who quit high school, and she was, by my assessment, living the dream. You know? She was working at Walgreens. She had spending money.
All right.
She didn't have to get up early and put on the
That's the best part,
uniform.
Right? Yeah.
I didn't add it up that she was still living at home with her mom.
No plaid skirts, no church on Fridays. Yeah. So I went to Catholic grade school. I got you.
I told my mom I was going to quit school, and she's like, "No, you're not. You're going to college." And I'm like, And I was so frustrated that she wouldn't even listen to me. I had my whole argument,
Yeah.
you know. But when I look at people that I see coming into the criminal justice system, they didn't have that. You know, they and I'm making assumptions about you.
Yeah.
But I know from my background, my mom was real strict, and she gave me good guidance. And we see so many people come into the criminal justice system who come from families that are very fragmented, come from really tough socioeconomic circumstances,
Right.
Drug abuse, substance abuse in the house, all kinds of stuff like that. And a lot of that, you know, tends to put people in a mindset where when they're invited to join a gang or invited to do something else, I mean, if they don't have the role models where they don't see the other path for themselves,
Right.
they're gonna jump in.
Yeah.
A lot of young guys in St. Louis, the ones with guns and things like that, you know, we've talked to them. They don't see themselves living in past 23, 24.
And that's an indictment all on its own.
Yeah, I mean, and that's probably one of the toughest things about being a prosecutor is there's huge societal forces happening here that are creating all of this crime, you know, bad schools, all kinds of stuff. And it all comes down on the desks of the police and the prosecutors, you know, and it's so frustrating because it's such a reactionary job.
Sure.
Whereas I would really like to be more proactive.
Yeah,
I'd
you
like
can't
to be
prevent it.
there
I mean,
when-
you might be able to prevent a crime, but you
No.
can't.
You really can't. And, you know, I can mentor, be a big sister and mentor kids and do what I can and charitably support organizations that mentor kids. But in the final analysis, my job as a prosecutor is kind of clean up on aisle 3.
Right,
You know?
right.
The worst has happened, and now we come in.
I was wondering what your take on the workhouse is.
I think the workhouse is horrific.
Yeah.
I've thought that for a long time. To think that they don't have air conditioning in that building. I've toured the workhouse on many occasions. I know exactly what it's like in the workhouse. And many times I have talked to people about getting air conditioning in there. And I understand they don't even have proper heat now as well.
Right.
That's just not safe. And I also have issues with the city jail too. I mean, I don't know if you remember this, but I did an investigation of the city jail because they were having people stabbing each other left and right. They had one guy break out the window and shimmy down the outside of the, you know, and he was a murderer.
Yeah.
You know, and he shimmies down the outside of the building with bed sheets and takes off. So yeah, we did an investigation of the jail too, and I think there's all kinds of issues with those. It's very screwed up.
Yeah. So let's talk about restorative justice and mediation. You know, I've read a lot about restorative justice because from a philosophical standpoint, this is deep, but this is what this show's all about. It makes a whole lot of sense. You bring two people with conflict in, with overlapping. They may have an overlapping conflict. You mediate that. You show somebody who has committed a crime the destruction they've done to their community. Now, I think that person has to believe that the community has value in the first place, and you kind of set up.
They themselves have value.
Right, and you kind of pointed to some of them don't, and that again, that's an indictment on society. That's not from my opinion, that's not an indictment on the person.
No.
That's an indictment on society. But I wanted to ask you what your impressions were of something like Cure Violence. That's what they're going with, is Cure Violence. Do you think it's going to make an impression?
Is that restorative justice?
Well,
I
I mean,
more as violence interrupters.
Yeah, I mean, but I think they're kind of, in a way, the same, because I think the people who are being recruited to be the interrupters, they themselves are not what you would call perfect angels, I guess. They're people who have interacted with the criminal justice system before and have come out on the other side wanting to make a positive change to their community. And I think that is, like you said, you have to have somebody, whether it's a father, a mother, a grandparent, a friend, a pastor, a teacher, that says to you, you have worth and your community values your worth, don't hurt that community. And that's, maybe I misread Cure Violence, but I think that's what they're kind of getting at. I know it's also going into the ER to a family that's someone and say, do not go after those people. Mm-hmm. Retaliation is not going to bring your loved one back. But I think they're on parallel tracks. I don't know. What do you think?
Well, I'm not an expert on Cure Violence. I just know what I've read in the Post-Dispatch,
Mm-hmm.
and I know Lewis Reed was very instrumental in bringing that and getting the funding for it. And on the one hand, I applaud him for doing that because I think that's real leadership. I think St. Louis does have a serious crime problem. Maybe when you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail.
Sure,
but I
right.
tend to focus on crime, and St. Louis's violent crime level is unacceptable and has been for some time. So I'm up for trying it. I wish, though, that they would have gone with a program with more research behind it.
Sure.
So many things can go wrong in a model like Cure Violence, and I think they've even found in Chicago that there were some issues with that.
Right.
And if there's good oversight and it's well run, it's might be worth a try. I mean, I applaud anybody who wants to stand up and do something about crime in St. Louis, but there are other ways to do. There are other programs that have a little bit more research
Mm-hmm.
behind them as being effective, and I kind of wish they would have gone with something like that.
So St. Louis has had violent crime problem. I agree with you on that. Some of that you were, I think a lot of that you were still in office from. I'm not,
Oh, yeah.
and I'm not, trying to slam you on this. But is there an ownership factor there? What really, you see that now. Well, the circuit attorney's not prosecuting these guys. What really, from your standpoint, can the circuit attorney's office do to? You can't prevent violent crime, right? I mean, or can you?
It's really hard to prove that causally. There's definitely things you can do that would have an effect, though. First and foremost, you can have a well-run prosecutor's office with smart, experienced people who do their jobs well and are well-managed and well-supervised. And the trains run on time, and you can manage the office in such a way that you're really focused on making sure that you're equitable. You don't ask for 10 years on this guy and a similarly situated guy. You ask for probation.
Sure, right.
There's a lot of cases, and you want to make sure that you're consistent, because being all over the place is not justice. You have to be consistent. Right. That takes management. You can do that. You can really focus on the most violent offenders in your city, the ones that are driving the crime, and set up some special programs, where you can use collected intelligence around the law enforcement agencies and stuff to really focus on those individuals. You can create diversion programs and stuff for other lower level crimes to free up your resources for the
and you worked with the
offenders.
courts on that. You were, and I again, just in my research, I'm all on board. I said this while I ran for office about the gun docket. I know that's not the direction that they went.
No, I wish they would have.
Yeah.
I think it would have been successful. I think we would have seen some different situation than what we've got right now.
But what do you do in a state like Missouri, where the state government has essentially said the right to bear arms is an intrinsic right?
Yeah.
I mean, they got him on a terrorism charge, but teenagers can walk into a Springfield Walmart with an AK-47, and really, there is nothing that you as the prosecutor can do, because what crime did he break?
No.
Now, they got him on, again, a terrorism charge, but let's be honest, that's not really the crime that he committing hysteria. I mean,
I'm not. I'm a gun owner, but I am not a fan of lax gun laws like we have in Missouri, and that was very frustrating when you're trying to make the city safer from gun violence, which is a huge scourge on the city. And in the meantime, in Jefferson City, you're getting less and less regulation governing when people can carry guns. You know, it's almost like they're going to issue a gun at birth now to
Right,
every Missourian.
right.
So what we focused on was we looked at the statistics, and most of the gun crimes were being committed with stolen guns. And so we engaged in a public information campaign where we tried to really make the point to people that you have to secure your gun. You know, if you go down to the ball game and you get out of your car and you go and put your gun in the trunk and go in, you know, there's guys sitting there watching.
Yeah,
you.
right,
You know,
right.
they harvest
Yeah.
from those parking lots.
Right.
And you know what? If you put it in the glove box, they're going to look there too.
Sure.
I mean, it's not brain surgery. Or if you don't have your gun locked up in your house, you know. So all of these stolen guns are going into the city and they're being used to commit crimes. So that's one way that we can maybe, despite the terrible laws that are coming down the pike in Jefferson City, we can try and stem some of the gun violence that we're seeing in our communities, is ask people to be responsible owners. You know, the saddest cases I see is when little kids find guns
And they shoot
each
themselves,
other,
yeah.
shoot themselves, you know, absolutely heartbreaking, you know, senseless. Those shouldn't happen. And if, you know, I had a bully pulpit as circuit attorney, and I felt that if I could get people to change their behavior in that way, then I could save some lives.
I want to touch on perhaps some of the hotter button issues. This has been a great conversation, but I want to get into the three things with you that I think are important.
Okay.
Before you left office, you made the decision to prosecute Jason Stockley. And I know I've read all of your kind of postmortems on that. I know there's not a whole lot you can talk about.
I actually haven't postmortemed it because it's the
Well,
subject of
well,
active litigation.
Well,
right now.
that's what I mean. You know, everybody's asked you, you know, what, so,
Right.
and then you have said, well, I can't talk about it, and so I don't want to go that direction. What I wonder is what you maybe personally took away from that situation, which you had made a comment to, I believe, St. Louis Public Radio, that you were surprised that the Darren Wilson verdict didn't cause the violent protests to happen in St. Louis City. Mm-hmm. They kind of made their way there with the Stockley protests that happened. And so just as a citizen and someone who obviously was in the middle of that, but what did you learn, or what was kind of the personal take? Is that a tough question to ask?
I don't know what I learned from it.
I mean, it had to be the toughest case that you...
No.
No.
No, it wasn't. But I was gone by the time of the
Verdict, right.
And actually, my husband and I travel a lot in our motorhome, and we kind of missed out on a lot of it. However, I will say, and there's actually, you know, Stockley has sued me. I believe that that's not going to be successful. It's been thrown out of court, in federal court on the trial level, and they appealed it to the 8th Circuit Court of Appeals, where it's pending right now. So I can't talk about it. I'd love to come back and talk
I've never
about it.
actually met with somebody who's actively being sued before, so this is a bucket list thing.
Oh,
This
yeah,
is great, yeah.
Well, that's the other thing. If you're the circuit attorney, you do get
Sued a lot, yeah.
So I'd love to talk about it once it's over because I have a lot of thoughts. But I will say this generally. I have never prosecuted anyone for a crime ever once that I did not believe was guilty of the crime.
Yeah,
And that I did not believe they had evidence to prove it beyond a reasonable doubt.
yeah.
So that, you know, that's, you can extrapolate from that how
Sure,
I
sure.
feel about
Well, I
this
mean,
case.
okay, so this is a really, really rough analogy, but you know, the furor over Hillary Clinton's emails. Okay, so we're going there.
Okay.
Was that the argument that the FBI made was we're not bringing charges because we'll lose, and you would be not a very good circuit attorney if you were bringing charges against somebody that you thought, well,
Yeah,
this is a 50-50, we're going to give it a shot.
No,
I mean,
would
that
never
wouldn't
do
be, that would be dumb.
I would never. And I tell you, it's unethical for prosecutors, I believe, to bring charges against people if they don't believe that they can win.
Sure.
And the standard of proof in a criminal court is proof beyond a reasonable doubt. So that's not like in civil court, and for those of us this is radio, so.
Yeah, right.
You imagine the scales and they're equal. If just a feather lands on one side, that's enough to win in civil court. But it has to be a bowling ball to win.
And you need a unanimous
criminal.
jury.
Yes, for guilty or not guilty.
Right, which is tough when
Otherwise it's hung.
when
But in
you're,
this case, it was a judge.
well, he chose an administrative trial versus a jury trial.
He did.
Yeah,
because
that was his.
He
I mean, I will say.
felt that he would get a better
Well,
deal that
right.
way, and he did.
That's what I was going to say. I mean, he likely felt that he would not be successful.
Yeah, I mean, his trial lawyers are very good lawyers.
Oh yeah. Well,
Very good lawyers.
you hired the best. No, I mean, I think I don't want to put words in your mouth. We're on kind of the same page. You do what you think is best, and when you think that, I've always thought one of the toughest jobs has to be being a defense attorney when you know your client is guilty, but your job is to get them the best outcome possible. And
Right.
does that mean life without parole instead of the death penalty? I mean,
Yeah,
that's
good.
still a better outcome.
Right.
But to sit, if I was representing you and I said, Jennifer, did you kill them? And you say, yep, I did. That is a hard job to
Right.
then go to a jury of 10 people, 12 people, 8, whatever, and say this person is
Right.
is not guilty. That's tough. That's a tough one.
Yeah, it is, and I have a lot of respect for public defenders for that reason, and all defense attorneys. I'm not sure that I could do that. I
Yeah.
don't know, maybe I could, but in law school we're taught to argue both sides of it. But I've spent my career seeing the victims, seeing that side of it, and the heartbreak that is just visited upon people, that they don't invite themselves. They're
Right.
just victimized out of the clear blue sky, child victims and all kinds of stuff. And I'm really, after being exposed to that gut-wrenching and quite grim subject matter for over 2 decades, I can't imagine myself turning around and being a defense attorney, to
Yeah.
be honest. But I'm glad that they're there, because it's very important that they hold the state to their burden of proof.
Yeah.
That's our legal system. The state has to prove it. It's not like in some third world country where you just get snatched off the street and nobody ever sees you again.
Right.
So yeah, but as far as prosecuting police officers, that's always really tough.
Yeah, that was my next question. See, she's so good at this.
And reviewing, we just started during my tenure reviewing the police shootings. Before that, and I worked that out with Sam Dodson, but before that, we didn't even find out about police shootings. I remember being horrified when I heard about how many cases the city paid millions of dollars to settle of police shootings. So if the city's paying money in settlement for these, then there must be some problem with the shooting.
Right.
And it was never brought to me. I was never made aware of it whatsoever. And people don't realize how separate the police and the prosecutors are. I mean, we're different buildings. We have different functions.
Right.
I've had 4 police chiefs during my tenure, and I tried to have close relationships with them. But, sometimes months would go by and we wouldn't even have any occasion to meet or speak.
Sure.
And so this system where the circuit attorney's office also reviews the police shootings, I think, is a good one, because I don't think people can investigate themselves.
Yeah, but there's got to be a tension there, though.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, okay, so...
Total tension.
Yeah, and so I wonder, because, the police chief's got to... I guess he doesn't have to, he or she, got to protect their guys, the guys wearing the badge,
Well,
But,
I don't know if it's so much the chief, but there is a lot of wagon circling in the rank and file.
Sure.
The chief usually can kind of see a little bit more above the fray, but from an emotional standpoint, it's really hard for police departments to look at one of their own and say,
They committed a
this guy
crime.
and objectively assess whether they committed a crime or not. I just don't think that the police department has any business investigating their own shootings. They should bring in completely different investigators.
Sure.
But, the best that we could do was have the circuit attorney's office also investigate at the same time.
So that's something that circuit and district attorneys around the country and major cities are grappling with, because there is rightfully high support among the public for police. It's really, in my view, it's really no different than military members committing crimes. When war crimes when they're on active duty. That's a tough thing to go to. The Pentagon does what it needs to do, but to say this person put their life on the line, but they've now committed a crime, that's tough. Yeah.
Yeah, and for that reason, I think the conviction rate in cases where police officers are charged with the shooting in the line of duty or something like that is like 10% nationwide.
So if
it's very low,
yeah,
because people have a hard time doing that, holding police officers accountable because of the tremendous service that they provide for all of us.
But none of us can be without account. How do you have a police department that is trusted by the community if the community? This isn't something you can fix. You're not the police chief. You're not but that's just has always kind of frustrated me, was the lack, I guess, of reflection or awareness that by not allowing you to be scrutinized, which is really where I think it comes from. It's not just shootings. It's the whole department is almost unscrutinable. That's not a word. You can't and so, but you've took that job on in the interest of public, not public safety, but in the interest of the public. You took on that role, and that has to be. People will. I wrote down cowardice, because people will come at you hard for going after the police.
Yes.
And
people will also come at you hard for not going after the police.
Right.
I mean, usually my litmus test is if everybody was pissed off at me, I was probably right where I needed to be, and not leaning one way or another, but calling them as I see them, which going back, that's the core of what you do as a prosecutor.
But I think the public is not served when the circuit attorney and the head of the police union are calling for each other to be fired, and it may be a reflection of the individuals, I don't know, but it doesn't create a swell of trust that either is acting in good faith.
No. Joe Moqua was the chief for the longest time during my tenure, and I don't know if you remember Joe.
Well, the mustache. I remember the mustache.
Yeah. And he's a smart guy, and he and I, every chief that I've ever dealt with, there's so many built-in friction points in that relationship. Prosecutors have to tell the police, hey, I'm sorry, I know you stayed up all night, but you don't have enough evidence, and I can't charge this guy.
Yeah.
And those conversations are happening at least a dozen a day, every day of the year. There's all kinds of ways that we create fiction with each other. And so Moqua and I used to, have these debates, and then he would finally, he said to me once, you and I are like in a Catholic marriage. We can't get divorced. I'm the only police chief, you're the only prosecutor in the city of St. Louis. And I'm like, that's right. I mean, if we don't get along, we are not serving the public. We're not doing our job. And so there have been times when I've had police chiefs that I just found incredibly difficult to work with. And I'm Irish, and I can lose my temper, but I will really work hard to pick up that phone and find a way to get along with that person.
Yeah.
Go visit them and make us have a relationship, because otherwise we're dysfunctional.
Yeah.
And the public doesn't need that.
And one thing that I reflect on with the current circuit attorney, there's also a communication element built in there. The young child that was murdered by the guy who had stolen the Brinks money truck. That's about as specific as I can get, but it was in summer. And the gentleman has admitted he got caught stealing the truck, and has admitted that he killed the child by accident, or it wasn't an intended target. But the circuit attorney has not brought charges because she says there's no evidence that he's the one that did it, even though they have a confession. She says the police department has not provided her office enough evidence that they think they can get a conviction. And I think sometimes there's just a breakdown in communication to the public as to,
yes.
But to defend the people, and you said it earlier, how many times has a case given you front page headlines that you really wish you could say more?
Exactly. I think that's the case here. It's got to be. I mean, that's one of the toughest things about the job is I'm certain that, because there are still some really smart, really experienced prosecutors in that office, and I'm certain that there is an issue with this case that they are not at liberty to discuss.
Right.
That is not obvious to the public. I can't. I would have a hard time believing
But
that it
that's-
was other than that.
But no different than what you went through with the Stockley trial. There's just some things that the public can't know about, and if that bedrock of trust isn't already established,
Right.
you get counter narratives that
Exactly.
the police are covering it up, or the circuit attorney is a cop hater, and that
Exactly.
feeds into Facebook, and then off it goes.
Yeah, you gotta work at developing the trust of the community, and there's ways to do that, but you don't do it once there's something on fire.
Yeah.
You've got to build that up, and you have to, work on that every day as the circuit attorney in all parts of the city, not just the part where you're most comfortable. You
Yeah.
know?
Right.
I'm from South St. Louis. I was very comfortable going to South St. Louis, where people would say, "I knew you when you were a little girl," and pinching my cheek.
Yeah. Right.
But I actually, Freeman Bosley gave me the advice that I should actually really focus on going to North St. Louis and areas of the city where I'm not from, because it's going to take those people seeing me 10, 15 times before they feel comfortable.
Yeah.
So I focused on that, and I actually did a couple times get people to pinch my cheek up in North St. Louis too. I made some good friends up there, but you got to go all over the whole city and build that relationship, because when the what hits the fan, how much trust do they have
Right,
in you? It's
right.
like, if they don't have trust, if you haven't built up that equity, one controversial thing and you're going to overdraw your account with the public.
Right.
And that job is nothing if not constant controversy.
Yeah.
So
Someone's always going to be unhappy when they get charged. So,
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I
and
would
there's
assume.
always someone lying. Every
Yeah.
criminal case, somebody's lying.
So the last thing I want to wrap up on, because you talk about trust, and with the newer generation of circuit attorneys, and we have two here, with Kim Gardner and Wesley Bell, they call them reformist or reform-minded circuit attorneys that are moving towards that non-lock 'em up. It's kind of the opposite of that. There was in both offices a great deal of turnover, and I feel like maybe some bad blood to start off. Certainly, I think Prosecutor Bell, from me to being completely removed, some of his staff attorneys joined the police union. It just was odd. But
Yeah.
I wondered if you could reflect on where your time in office went. I pulled a quote from you that you said about Kim Gardner, that it's going to be a bumpy road the first year or so, as it was under you, but ultimately she has what she needs to be successful. She has a good heart and cares about the city. Can you reflect on kind of what she walked into and the job that you think she's doing? You can take that however you want.
Let me say this. I was fortunate when I first took office. My predecessor, Joyce Hayes, never commented publicly on what she thought of what I was doing, and I was always so grateful for that, because I'm sure I did some things that she didn't agree with. That I've decided to extend that same courtesy to Kim. So you're not going to find me saying anything critical about Kim. It's a tough job.
Yeah.
I can speak about these quote reform prosecutors.
Yeah, that'd be great.
generally,
Yeah,
though,
sure.
across the country, and I really don't know Wesley Bell that
Yeah.
well, so I don't feel an obligation to not be critical of him.
Right.
I just don't know.
Right. But I mean, it was a shock that he. I mean, I think everybody.
Yeah.
I mean, nobody ever thought that he
Well,
would.
that's kind of a movement.
Yeah.
That sea change that I'm
Sure.
talking
Yeah,
about.
sure.
Where if you're an older white guy and you've made a name for yourself being tough on crime.
The millennials don't really go for that,
No,
and we can
there's
vote now.
And there's millions and millions of Soros dollars going in. Lots of money on coming after you, and it's just not time for being an old white guy and being tough on crime in urban areas.
Right.
But what people don't realize, and what's kind of funny, is a lot of this reform stuff has always been done by prosecutors. I'll tell you a story. For example, in 2002 and 2003, I reviewed 1,400 cases where people were in prison to make sure that their convictions weren't incorrect. And that was when forensic DNA testing first became available for use.
Okay.
And so there was all kinds of people sitting in prison who had been convicted when I was in high school and college, and they didn't have DNA testing. So I brought in a bunch of law students from WashU, from SLU, all these volunteers, and we reviewed these 1,400 cases to make sure that there wasn't anybody wrongfully convicted, and we identified some. That is now called conviction integrity, and people trumpet it, and I got this, and I got my conviction integrity thing. I had to be so quiet about that when I did it, because in the early aughts, people were not interested in this kind of reform stuff. And if I wanted to get reelected, I didn't want to be labeled soft on crime.
Sure.
To me, it didn't seem soft on crime, it seemed fair. We have this new technology. We can test bodily fluid for DNA, and we can see if we got it right, you know?
Right.
And, but I had to be hush-hush about it. I also did a whole lot of diversion things, and many times, if a defense attorney came to me and said, so-and-so wants to get in the Army, if he has a conviction, he won't be able to, and do you mind looking the other way on this, and they made that case, and sometimes I would meet with the person himself, and I would say, yeah, okay, I'm going to look the other way. But did I trumpet that? No, because I wanted to get reelected.
Right.
So this has been going on for a long time with a lot of prosecutors around the country, not all of them, but a lot of them, and I'm an example of it. So I think when you come in hot, and you've unseated the DA, and you come in with Soros money and everything else, and you start talking about the broken criminal justice system, and you start talking about a way that vilifies those lifelong public servants who work for you, who are there because they care about justice and they care about victims, and they've done things like conviction integrity review, and they've done stuff like that. When you come in and start talking in a way that vilifies them, you're going to have a huge morale issue.
Yeah.
And you're going to have your best and brightest walk right out the door.
Right.
And then, if you don't have anybody who knows what they're doing, then chaos ensues. So I actually have a consulting practice now, and I work with prosecutors all over the country. And we're trying to reach those new prosecutors and kind of say, hey, we've got some examples of where it's gone wrong around the country, where you come in and clear the decks, and you talk about these horrible people and blah, blah, blah. And then you spend the next 4 years spinning your wheels because you can't get traction on anything.
Right.
Versus some people come in and they don't necessarily assume that the old prosecutors are terrible or that they're going to be against them, and they see the value in them, and they're able to bring them along, and they can start working on their agenda right off the bat. So I think that's the big problem that spurs a lot of the turnover. I think that these new prosecutors are told to fire everybody because they're going to be against you. That's the Larry Krasner model in Philadelphia. Or they come in their mind thinking that they're evil. And, career prosecutors don't think of themselves as evil. They think of themselves as public servants who have spent their life trying to do the right thing. Times change, sensibilities change. We're not asking for life in prison without parole for a rock of crack anymore.
Right.
But we were always trying to do the right thing. Most prosecutors, obviously, there's bad eggs in every group.
Sure.
But
so that, in a larger sense, remind me, because I'm pretty sure I'm good on this one, but you guys had to identify by party to run as which.
It's such BS.
Right. I mean, it doesn't.
Some states don't have that. And
right.
I think that's appropriate.
Yeah. So, do you consider yourself a card-carrying Democrat? I mean, because I got a question about.
Moderate Democrat.
So I got a question then about the movement of the Democratic Party since the time that you were in office. Mm-hmm. I think you could even look at the difference between Eric Holder and I'm going to call her Loretta Lynn. It's not Loretta Lynn. What was her last name? Oh, whatever. Obama's second Attorney General. You can look it up. Loretta Lynch, which is really close to Loretta Lynn.
Was
the coal miner's daughter.
Coal miner's
yeah,
daughter,
right.
Yeah. Way different.
And so you got this huge whiplash between
Yeah.
Loretta Lynch and Jeff Sessions. Forget that. But let's
Yeah.
let's look at where, for instance, a Bernie Sanders or maybe an Elizabeth Warren would go on criminal justice versus a Joe Biden, who right now really is having a difficult time
Right.
trying to square the peg of tough on crime.
Well, Joe Biden ran for office every 2 years in the 90s. And as we discussed, you know, tough on crime was what everybody wanted because
Sure.
there was a horrible violent crime epidemic going
Yeah.
on. And, he's accountable to his constituents.
Sure.
So how can he not do what they want him to do? I mean, that's what you want your congressman to do.
Right.
You don't want him to go be elected and do the exact opposite
Right.
of what the sentiment of the community is. So I think we risk a lot when we're judging actions that took place in 1992 by today's
Yeah. Okay.
lenses. So I'm not a Biden fan per se, but I do think he gets a bad rap on that. And I don't know enough about Kamala Harris's
Sure.
record to judge her, or Amy Klobuchar, who's another former
Prosecutor. Right.
But I do know that I haven't met a single prosecutor in the entire state of California, and I know hundreds of them, that likes Kamala Harris. So,
Yeah.
for what that's worth,
Yeah.
they don't like her at all.
Yeah. So what does in Jennifer Joyce's mind? What should criminal justice reform mean? Well, we can take it at the federal level or the state level. When somebody
Right.
says we need criminal justice reform, what does that mean in 2020?
Well, I think that we can always improve the criminal justice system. We have improved it dramatically since I was, prosecuting those rocks of crack cases.
Right.
And I think that some of the things that we're talking about, taking a hard look at who the defendant is and what will benefit them, what will solve this problem for society, because just warehousing a defendant and having them come back out again as the same criminal, or maybe even more, a lot of times if you're young when you go to prison, that's like finishing school.
Right.
You come out a super criminal. Thinking about those issues and what type of intervention in the court system does society need to make this situation turn out as well as it possibly can for everybody concerned. Thinking about things that way will get you a long way. Investing in kids, gosh, for every dollar you spend on grade school kids, you can save $100 in the criminal justice system.
Really?
And we in America, we don't like to fix the roof until it starts raining, so we don't think about investing. We think about incarceration, and I think that's kind of dumb.
I love that quote. That's great because you're right. They build. I think about it with transportation. Build a bit. If there's a traffic jam, build the interstate bigger. Well, why
Right.
not just get get cars off the road?
Right.
Build a bigger jail when it's overfilled instead of investing in people to keep them from getting there in the first place.
Exactly. So there's a lot of different things, and there's new ideas every day, and I think it's such a fascinating area. The one caution I have for people, and this is my problem with Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders, getting back to your early question,
Yeah.
is you just can't throw the baby out with the bathwater. You can't believe what you've heard. You heard somebody talking about prosecutors like they're the great Satan and they're responsible for everything, including the hole in the ozone layer. Everything, there's good and bad in every profession. But when you throw the baby out with the bathwater and you talk about this horrible, evil criminal justice system and we need to clear the decks and start from scratch, that's really, I don't think, a helpful thing for society. I don't think that's the way to go, because remember, we have victims involved and we have to keep our communities safe. So there's a lot of competing interests here. I think that we can be reform and focused on public safety both, but you have to be thoughtful and intentional about it. You have to be open to everybody's ideas. You can't be closed-minded and think, well, these people are bad, these people are good, I'm going to listen to these people. I really hope to get a lot of meetings in the near future where I'm bringing together different types of prosecutors around the country. Some of them are more of the tough on crime variety, some of them are of the more what you would call reform variety, and trying to get ways for them to kind of come together and figure out what can we do to make our system better, because it's an evolution like anything else.
Sure. Yeah.
When I was a kid, 2 years old, I found a picture of myself recently. I'm going through some family photos for my family. An old picture of me and my mom in a car, and I'm 2 years old, and I'm in the front seat, and she has me bungee corded in. Okay,
Right.
so if there's an
Right.
impact, I'm gonna fly out the window, but I'll come back.
Right.
You know, so and my mom was really concerned about safety and stuff, and she would, and nowadays we look at that and we're like, oh my God, you're supposed to be in a car seat
Right.
facing the other way. Oh my God, everything evolves.
Yeah, they let people
Everything
smoke on
evolves.
airplanes.
Right. I myself smoked on air.
Did you really?
Yeah, I used
Wow.
to be a smoker back in the day. I quit when I was 30.
Huh.
Yeah, I quit
No
smoking
vaping
when I
now.
was 30, and I quit drinking when I was 40, and my husband was very frightened when I turned 50. What was I going to do? But we became vegan for a while.
Did
but
you really?
we got
Wow.
over that. But-
So my last question, just to kind of tie everything up. So there will be a new election. Mary Pat Carroll worked for you, right?
Carl, yes.
Carl,
Yes,
make
she
sure I get
did.
that right. She's running again for election.
Mm-hmm.
Just looking at the city of St. Louis from a prosecutor standpoint, or just a citizen, whatever. I don't, I do plan on endorsing her. But what gives you hope about where St. Louis is headed in terms of working with crime? Where do you think the next prosecutor it looks like it might be a she, regardless of who it is. What's going to be the biggest challenges for them that you see coming up? And is your door closed for running for election again at some point? That's a lot
Well,
to
I
go.
don't live in the city anymore.
You don't? Well, there's lots of opportunities outside of the city. There's even more out there. There's plenty of places. Yeah.
I think the problem, the number one challenge in St. Louis will be for the foreseeable future gun violence and the loss of life and the loss of young life as a result of that. And that is a huge problem. It's in many ways one of the most complex problems that we're ever going to face. There's so many causes. I think that's something that a prosecutor has to use their stature and their center. Prosecutors are kind of the center of the whole criminal justice. I used to call it prosecutors are the hub and the wheel. We have to get along with the mayor. We have to get along with the police chief. We have to, and then we had a consultant from IBM come, and they said we were the center of the criminal justice ecosystem, and I thought that sounded so much more cool.
You're the sun, and everybody revolves around you. Right?
But we can bring these people together, and we can bring in the educators, and we can talk about broad solutions and kind of be more proactive. I see that as a reform thing, as a way prosecutors need to use their position to exert leadership to get people moving in a direction that's going to create positive change with respect to crime issues, gun violence, So maybe we need to talk about what's happening to young people in school and things like that. So the new prosecutors, or the old prosecutor, whoever's the prosecutor, has to do that. And then I think we also have to have, get back to focusing on having a really top flight office there and getting some recruiting and retaining really talented people to do that work. I mean, those are tough jobs.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that's how I see that going. I'm not involved in the campaign at all whatsoever. And as I said, I don't live in the city of St. Louis right now, so it's not going to be something that I can even vote in.
Sure.
But I would like to generally see more young people get involved in politics, such as yourself. And I'd like to see, more, just a lot more young people coming in. I mean, I remember my husband and I would go around to ward meetings, and it would be just a couple of octogenarians and a flag, and,
Right.
Kevin is from New York, and he would say to me, wow, this is pretty sad. The Democratic Party's dying. And then you millennials came along, and now you're taking over.
Yeah.
It's,
If they'll let us, it's.
They will.
Yeah.
They
Well,
will.
they won't have a. Well, this sounds so militant, but I don't want to this is a whole nother hour conversation. But really, the divide in the country. I've said this on 2 other of these podcasts. The divide between the country right now is not really, in my opinion, Republican and Democrat. It's really the Boomers versus the Millennials, and everybody else is going, what the hell is going on?
Do you say, okay, boomer?
As a joke, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm hoping I can drop it. The problem is.
You're looking at a boomer here.
Yeah, well, my parents are boomers. My parents are boomers, but the problem is they're not in tune enough. If I said "okay, boomer," they'd be like, what?
What?
Yeah, what are you talking about? But I work with teenagers now, so I work with the Gen Zers, and
yeah.
it's, oof, yeah. Well, thank you so much for your time. Remind us all so you're consulting, and tell me what that business is.
I have two jobs. I work part-time for the Prosecutor's Center for Excellence, which is a think tank based in Manhattan that's designed to develop and promulgate best practices among prosecutors all over the country. And so I do that, and that's a nonprofit. And then I have a for-profit consulting business with Susan Ryan, who was until recently the spokesperson for Kim Gardner, but Susan and I have been colleagues for over almost 15 years now. Mm-hmm. And so we have a business called Vera Causa Group, and we consult with prosecutors around the country, large and small, East Coast, West Coast, everywhere, and we talk to them about how to do better communication with the public, as you touched on earlier, and leadership, and how to, okay, I just got elected, now what do I do?
Right.
That kind of stuff.
You know, that's a great thing, too, because the Washington Post just had a huge section that said, welcome to Congress, now what? Because
Right.
you do kind of, especially if it's a bitter, you know, it sounds like you got along with D. Joyce Hayes, but, you know, you beat somebody that really doesn't like you, they're not going to want to help you either.
Yeah.
You know, there's not a...
Unfortunately, they can leave a lot of...
Yeah, and there's not a lot of mentorship there either. You know, hey, here's my number, here's my email, call me. I'm willing to help you. So
we're trying to do that. Our clients are prosecutors, and we as long as they care about doing the right thing, we don't care what political party they are or, you know, what their mindset is. As long as they care about doing the right thing, we help them.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Jennifer
Thank
Joyce. You can follow her on Twitter, Jennifer Joyce, CA. This has been In the Middle. I'm Derek Miller. We'll talk to you next time.